bloom in history, I think this community began to understand nitrogen, even though it's not a traditional pollution. Too much of it causes some damage to the river. We've got some photos, Jimmy, of the algae bloom from this summer. This is a shot. This is what Mandarin looked like for those people.
And this was this year, right?
This year, summer of 2009. Let's go to the next shot. We've got just a few. That's Julington Creek, one of the most well-known and valuable tributaries to the river in this area. That's the marina. You can imagine the economic impacts of something like this. Let's go to another shot. This has kind of become the poster child of this year's algae bloom. That's Christopher Creek. It's one of the creeks that goes under San Jose. That was in July of this year. And what's bad, Jimmy, not only is this unsightly and it has a, if we had smell-o-vision, you would realize that's a very unpleasant odor. It was toxic, and we had 2 health advisories. We got one more photos from people maybe in Clay County watching this. That's Doctor's Lake. That's the problem. The solution, obviously, is we've got to reduce the amount of nitrogen that goes into the river. The Water Management District estimates every year all of us put about 32 million pounds of nitrogen. That's probably good for the shots.
I've got a couple questions related to that.
Sure.
One is, could you tell folks what are the sources
Absolutely.
of the nitrogen and phosphorus to a lesser extent, but yes, the nutrients that go into the river?
Well, there's a couple of sources, and the first primary one is something called point source discharge. That's where all of us kind of conjure up images of big pipes discharging water or discharging waste into the river. Every day in our section of the river, about 130 million gallons of wastewater from industries. We have a paper mill, Georgia Pacific. It's a large source of nitrogen. Our wastewater plants here in Duval County, JEA, is the utility that treats the waste for this community. They discharge anywhere from 70 to 80 million gallons. There's other small industries, and then all the runoff from our yards and parking lots, businesses, they go into the storm drain. That also carries nitrogen.
And
so the combined inflow of all that is what stimulates what we just saw.
And I understand also it could be even failing septic tanks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Septic tanks, fertilizer from our yard. We have a large agricultural area south of us. They're a source. People, I think, are always, what's the source? And I always say, well, if you're sitting at home, look to your left or right. All of us help contribute to this problem.
Right.
And it is something that is impacting not only the St. Johns River. Florida is probably one of the places in this country that has the biggest problem with these algae blooms, and that's because we have, as we talked about, tons of nitrogen, a lot of sunshine, and we have very slow-moving streams. The St. Johns River is the kind of the poster child for these events because we have everything this organism, this blue-green algae, needs to. Sadly, as you saw, it's kind of what I always tell people: nature gone wild. It's a biological event, but it's just huge quantities of biomass.
And stimulated by too much nitrogen.
Too much nitrogen.
And Neil, another question. You had mentioned earlier that there's problems with these algae blooms, and one is obviously it's just very unsightly, and you mentioned it can be toxic.
Oh, yeah,
Could you give a little more specific information? What is the impact on the ecology, and what are the potential impacts to humans?
Well, let's talk about the health of the river generally. You saw some of the shots you saw. It really coats the surface of the water, and there are plants that live along the banks, the sides of the river. Eelgrass, most people know that beautiful long wide-leafed grass. That algae that you saw really just smothers that out, prevents sunlight from reaching it, so it damages that plant, which is critical for the fishery of the river. And as you can imagine, just on a kind of selfishly economic issue, it's not really that much fun to go out boating in that. So it impacts our marine industries, our boating, fishing, people that depend on recreation. And then the final thing, Jimmy, when that algae lyses, when the cells break, the organism releases a gas that can be and has been shown to be toxic, not only to humans. When you see an event like that, I always tell people, don't let your pet drink that water. And just, it's best if we all stay back from it. So it's ecologically, economically, and just, from all angles, it's not a big, it's a bad problem, and it really impacts how we feel about ourselves. A lot of people tell me when they see that, it just, you just feel bad. You know the river's polluted. And one of the things that we have been working on since the inception of Riverkeeper is dealing with this problem. In 1998, the state identified the St. Johns River as impaired for nitrogen because of what we saw. And since that time, we're coming up on our 10th anniversary, we at Riverkeeper have been fighting to help establish a blueprint, if you will, for dealing with this. What are we going to do to prevent these algae blooms?
One thing I want to say too, Neil, this is, it's a couple of anecdotal points about what you just said as far as the impacts, and one is from an economic standpoint. One of our board members, Brooks Busey, his family, they own a marina, right, Sadler Point Marina, and he said that, of course, from his point of view, obviously the economy's already hurt the boating industry,
sure.
But he said this was just like a double whammy. When you have this type of an event happen, he said even less people have an interest in recreating on the river, less interest in doing work on their boats. And so his revenues were down significantly this year, not only from the economy, but also because of the algae bloom, which people don't want to. And this was an extensive one, even though it wasn't quite, I guess you could say, as bad as 2005. This past year probably lasted longer. It started all the way back in April. We were seeing blooms. We saw it and we're seeing it even today. Right. There's still blooms occurring in the river.
We're filming this in November, and if people may not know the geography of the river, there's a small community south of Palatka called Willaca, which a lot of people in Jacksonville have second homes there. There has been an ongoing algae bloom, some weeks as bad as what we saw there, since April. And I heard from some of our members and supporters down there as late as yesterday that the bloom is still there. Many people in the Ortega area know Pirates Cove. It's a little community off of the river. They have had an algae bloom most of the summer, and one of our board members lives there, and he sent me a photo. The algae bloom is still there.
Well, it was interesting too, Neil, earlier this, well, actually about a month ago, we were getting calls at the office from people that lived in the Pirates Cove area, in the Ortega area, because of a smell that they said smelled like raw sewage. And they said it was so powerful that businesses were calling, saying it was driving their business away. People didn't want to be around it. And then finally, after JEA was there looking for pipe breaks, and the Water Management District came, and all of these regulatory agencies came, they concluded it was the algae. Right. And that it was amazing, because we even had board members that went over to check it out themselves firsthand because they didn't believe it.
Yeah, me
and
either.
said the smell was so powerful that it
you could smell it going down Highway 17.
I also want to, I was talking about another anecdotal story about the health impacts, and we receive calls a lot about at the office from people that have experienced respiratory problems, different types of.
It's a pretty common thing.
It's almost, for most people it's like your an allergy attack or something like that. But I just heard the other day from a supporter of ours that he does some sampling, water sampling for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Association.
Administration.
Administration.
Yeah,
NOAA.
people know it's
and he said he was looking at some of the phytoplankton, the algae, under a microscope, and actually had an asthma attack that was so bad as a result of exposure to those toxins from this algae that it put him in the hospital. He said it was a serious attack, and so I think that shows you, and that's just obviously one
that's a
extreme example.
People,
but it can have some serious impacts on economy, our health, and of course, obviously, the ecology of the river.
So I think that gives people a general background of why we've been fighting this issue, and This week, there